I believe it's KDHE, and Kathy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, oversees care managed care providers. They're responsible for making, for example, sure those providers are following care guidelines for full coverage for people who receive care benefits. And it could be that sometimes one of those managed care agencies isn't working the way a provider may think they should be working. And so that provider could then advocate to KDHE to provide better oversight. That's an example where you're not talking to legislators about laws that you want changed, or about more money for, say, mental health or things like that, but you're talking to an agency to say, hey, we need better oversight here to make sure that people are getting the health care they need. On the federal level, it's the same thing. You got laws that you advocate for, budget, agency policies, and then also we can't forget that the courts are a form of advocacy too. And you see this recently in the Supreme Court with the DACA decision. That was an example of presidential executive order that wasn't being enforced, and people took it to court and went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, I mean, without going into great detail, DACA is good. We need to keep it, or at least it was a 5-3 decision. You also have advocacy that takes place at the ballot box, and not so much in Kansas, although I am going to talk about that in a second here. But in Missouri, a great example of that going on right now is on the ballot you have provision to expand Medicaid coverage to people within 30% or so of the poverty lines. And so the people then get to decide by vote, by referendum, if Missouri is going to expand Medicaid. And that's another form of the people who are working on voting, encouraging you to vote for that, are advocating, obviously, for Medicaid expansion. And then there are going to be people advocating against it. Those people are also advocates. And so those are forms of where different places, venues where advocacy can take place. What I'm going to talk to you about, just for, again, try to keep this as brief as possible, is a campaign that I worked on. And this is another example of advocacy, and that's working on a constitutional amendment. In Kansas, the voters can amend the Constitution, and I don't know if this is across the board, but in this particular case, you amended the Constitution with a simple majority vote. I mean, a simple majority to amend it. So we needed to pass this issue, which I'm going to talk to you about in a second. We needed 50.1% of the vote in order for it to work. And what was going on here is in 2009 or 10 or so, a group of disability advocates discovered that there was an antiquated provision in the state constitution that gave the legislature the right to bar someone with a mental illness from voting. It was a really horrible, antiquated piece of language that, frankly, nobody was aware of, and to our knowledge had never really been enforced. But because it was on the books, and for mental health advocates, it was such a big deal to consider the prospect that the state has the right to keep you from voting if you had a mental illness. A bunch of advocates decided that, well, we need to use this as an opportunity, a vehicle to draw more attention to what mental illness is and what mental health is, because clearly our Constitution didn't understand what that meant. And so these advocates went to the legislature. So the first step was they had to convince the legislature to put this amendment on the ballot to change the language of the Constitution so that it would guarantee the right of people with mental illness to vote no matter what. Nobody could stop them. So they went to the legislature to do that. The legislature approved it almost unanimously. I think there was one person in the House who voted against it. And then it was on the ballot of the 2010 off-year election. Off-year meaning no president was on the ballot, but you had a a campaign then that we had to wage, and we needed money to get that campaign going. So we applied for some grants from health foundations. I believe Sunflower was Health Foundation was one of the main ones to support this, and got about $100,000, which is not a lot for a statewide campaign, to put together. And you'll see on here on the screen some materials that we used to get this thing across. And the thing we needed to do was educate people educate the public, the voters, about the fact that mental health issues, mental illness should not be just on its face reason to prevent someone from voting. That there are a whole wide range of mental illnesses that people have that allow them, I mean, despite those mental illnesses, they still can lead healthy, productive lives. And even if you can't lead a healthy, productive life, who's to tell you that you don't have the mental capacity to make a decision about who to vote for? So we went out there and said, look, we have people in the military who experience PTSD. We have children or young adults who've grown up with attention deficit disorder. There's people diagnosed with bipolar disorder. There's famous people who've had mental illnesses. There's even speculation that people like Abraham Lincoln might have had, well, he did talk about serious depression. So we just went on and on with different examples to try to normalize mental illness. And the money we got for this campaign included a little bit for a survey, and I just want to bring this up because it shows that we think that our work made a difference. In the survey we did, we were within the margin of error of losing this election. So it was like 52 or 54% supported it, but it was, there was a 4 to 5% margin of error. It could have, according to the survey, not made it across the finish line. After our campaign with, we had some mailers that were targeted to voters that we thought might be on the fence. Did that statewide. We did this toolkit. We did a lot of earned media, got some media attention to it. And when it was all said and done, forgive me, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it was over 60% approved this change to the Constitution to protect people's right to vote. So, so that's the campaign in a nutshell. Chandra, if you can, this screen, if you put your hover over it, I think there's an arrow that'll allow you to flip to other pages. If you just want to leave it on there, I thought this might be a good place for people when we get into the small groups to just kind of review some of this. It goes over some of what I talked about. And there are more materials and things. But what we wanted to do was break people up into some small groups and raise the question, how, if at all, did this campaign look at an issue through a trauma lens? Not that we were thinking specifically about trauma-informed care in those days, but the whole point of what we're doing today is trying to see what would it take to for Alive and Thrive to get involved in promoting policies and deciding what those would be that are trauma informed, and how would we encourage policymakers to, as part of their decision-making process, see their policies through a trauma lens. And so the questions are up there. I don't know, Chan, if you want to leave the questions up, or at some point maybe turn to the vote yes on 2 things so people can see more details about that.
When you go into your groups, you won't be able to see these questions. So I want you all to write these questions down. I won't be able to share a screen for you in the group. But if you have pen and paper, because we're getting ready to go into them. So for those of you who are just joining us, Mark basically gave an overview of some policy work that he did with a constitutional amendment where they were trying to pass something that said that if you had a mental illness, you could not vote, basically. So what we want to do is use this policy and the verbiage that Mark gave you. So right now, if you have any questions, I suggest you ask them, because you're getting ready to go into your groups. But we really want to make sure that we understand what a trauma lens looks like when we're talking about policy. So was it constitutional? Was it trauma informed? And if not, why or why not? And what principles guided your decision to say if the amendment was trauma informed or not? And the reason why these questions are so important is because we're going to start to build a document from Alive and Thrive that will guide the different policy groups. When we're looking at policies, we want to be able to say, does this policy this? Does this policy that? What are the principles? But it's something that we want the community to help us build, which is you all. So if you have any questions, I'm gonna give you like a minute to pop up a question if you have any for Mark about this policy before we break you into groups to kind of talk about it. And then I'll give you about 10 minutes to just kind of answer both of these questions, and then we'll come back and talk about it as a group. So any questions?
Do you want us to write them down, Chan?
Yeah, just make sure. So I want to make sure that someone in the group has them so that they can report out, and you all know what you're talking about. Because I won't be able to share a screen for you in your group.
Chandra, I also dropped him into chat. I think people should be able to see the chat in the small groups. We can test that out. So
if you
dropped it in there.
Put it in the chat before we go into the small groups, we should be able to see it. If you put it in the chat while we're in the small group, we won't be able to see it.
Okay, I just dropped it in, so it should be there now.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Another thought I had, Kathleen or Chan, if you could drop the link to that Yes on 2 page into the chat so people can, if they want to review that, they can review that on their own screens.
Yeah, that was kind of my question, because I kind of
Okay.
needed to see the wording of the amendment. Thanks, Mark.
Mark, we had a question of what was the exact wording of the amendment. I don't think he has the exact wording, but
Well,
can you give him an overall?
It is on the it is in that link. If you go to that and then you click, I believe it's on that one. Maybe it's I think I can find a different link if you want. We can get that exact. It was actually a very complicated kind of amendment. It was very long, and so that's why we really worked on simplifying the message to vote to protect your right to vote. I mean, vote yes on 2 to protect every Kansan's right to vote.
All right, everyone, are you ready for your groups? We are getting ready to go into them. I'm gonna break you all up into 4 groups, and you'll have 10 minutes to do this. Anything else we want to add? I love that extra lens of the language that we need to be aware of. Anything else we want to add to this?
I will say this, according to the language of this amendment, let's even use the example of recent protest or somebody getting into a verbal altercation and getting put into jail. According to the language of this article, if you have been put in jail, not even just penitentiary, but if you have been committed to jail, by law, they can exclude you from voting.
Which is a huge misconception, even when it comes to like the felon piece of it. And a lot of people think that if you're a felon that you don't get to vote. And once you are out of prison, you are able to get reinstated. You just have to register. And they discourage a lot of people from registering. So that's that voter information that we have to make sure that people are aware of as well.
And Chandra, that's the part we talked a little bit about in the first session. This has been something that's just absolutely, since I've learned about it, I'm just appalled. I know in Johnson County during COVID, our average daily population in our jail dropped from 850 to 550, so 300 individuals. And that was primarily because right now in 1980, we passed laws that allow people before they're convicted, it's called pretrial detention. So you've been arrested, you haven't been convicted, you haven't been charged, you haven't been found guilty, but you're put in the jail. And we did that because we believe people wouldn't appear. But people with resources can bond out. And so when I read this language, I think about commitment to a jail. You haven't even been convicted of a crime, but you're in what's called pretrial detention.
That's right.
And I'm just appalled that in Johnson County, our ADP dropped from 850 to 550. And it was primarily because, not exclusively, but, you know, please know that there were little other bits and pieces, but the majority of individuals were those individuals that we felt like did not need to be detained pre-trial. And the more when you dig in, I think that's what I'm learning. And I just so appreciate Sherry's persistence to find the language, because you guys are right. When you dig in and you start to pull things apart, it's amazing what often are the consequences and then the unintended or intended secondary and tertiary consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So I just share that because I just felt like it dovetailed into that part of the conversation.
Hey, I'm gonna kick in right here. I agree. And right here in Wyandotte County, we had a 20% decrease in with COVID as far as folks getting out of being detained because of COVID. And then they were not admitting as many people to be detained because of COVID. So that's part of what District Attorney shared with us, that there was a 20% decrease in those who were detained because of COVID. And so I think around the country, this is typical, and it is a problem with bail and the detainees. And we are definitely, that's one of the things we're definitely working on, is trying to figure out how can we help those, if it's mental illness or whatever, that are in or being detained and do not have the money to pay bail. How can we help them? So that's a very good point. It's not just in Johnson County, it's a nationwide challenge, and we are definitely working in that direction too.
Can I jump in for a second here? I just want to ask, one of the questions was to look at the principles that guided your decisions here. And I think it would be interesting to hear from some people about what trauma-informed principles did people use looking at this? I think, Sherry, you did imply a lot of that when you were talking, but I would be curious about other people too, what they had to say.
Chandra, if I might just say, I almost wish that these two issues could be separated because they're so complex.
Yeah.
And both areas are not well known and understood in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, once we're talking about, people's mental level, maturity levels and even language barriers, it almost has to be separated to be understood. And it's not fair to lump both of them together as serious as both of these issues are. And then the other thing that our group was kind of talking about was kind of like, who is to decide, on mental illness? Is it that you have to be on disability to be able to be discarded? Or is it somebody that's just temporarily having, the baby blues after a maternity? It's just a very extreme case scenario in the way the language is. And it's just, I don't know, I just feel like it's not fair that it's been lumped together when they're both critical issues.
So, Brenda, what I'm taking from that is just making sure that that the issue addresses the issue, and not that we are confusing topics or intertwining things that do not belong together. Is that kind of a good summary for you, or?
It is, and if we're going to talk about pamphlets and having things in other languages and a more common understanding thing, I think that we would have to explain to educate, and that would be the group that goes into education, educate a little bit more on what mental health is, and educate a little bit more about conviction and what this whole discussion we're having here lately, of the impacts that it makes, just spending one night in jail or being arrested just for voicing your rights. It's not just to just, be taking your voice. If you were arrested for expressing the voice, and then it goes back to being educated on constitutional rights as well and human rights, but it's just kind of complex to lump all the language into one page. That is going to be breaking down into more, lower grade language and then translated. We just have to make sure that the information is not lost in translation because there are very complex issues.
I agree.
I'd like to say, I when we put this together, I was really not thinking about the other part of this constitutional provision, which discusses whether you have a right to vote if you're a convicted felon. And that, I think, goes to show you how, 10 years ago when we worked on this, I don't think anybody brought that. I think some people may have brought it up in the campaign, but the idea at the time was, let's tackle one issue in this constitutional provision at a time. And I don't know why the felon issue has never come back up again. I think within the realm of disability rights, at that time, they were looking specifically at mental illness as a potential disqualifying element, and so they built the campaign strictly around that without addressing the felon issue. I think from that campaign perspective, it would have been a very difficult sell to the public to say, get rid of that and the mental illness restriction. But honestly, I don't think they talked about it in any great detail. I think the sole focus was on this idea of potentially restricting someone with mental illness. Now, that said, I think the discussion here is great because it does open up the issue of, is it trauma informed to prevent someone in jail from voting? I mean, what crime is it that somebody has done that says they should have no right to vote? And it's a good debate to have. I mean, maybe some people feel like if you've committed a murder, then that's the price you pay. Other people would say, let's not lump all felons together. And if you have a drug conviction, why should you be stripped of the right to vote? And what does that do to you as a person to enter into a system where you are no longer a full citizen? So and then how does that affect you on down the road? What kind of trauma does that bring upon you? I think those would all be very good things to look at.
I think
that'll be a really good thing for like our justice group.
well, I think also is
go ahead, Elizabeth.
Sorry, I was like, this keeps happening is that this going to a Hamilton reference, in the room where it happens, the people that it affects are not in the room where this happens. So maybe there were people with some mental illnesses that were in that room, but there were not felons in that room to say, hey, this affects me in this way. And that just continues to be a theme, that secondary effect of, if we don't involve the people who this directly involves, is it going to be an equitable response, policy response, law response to what the problem is?
Well, here is kind of two things with that. One, I agree with Mark. While I believe this whole thing should be thrown out, I already know change a lot of times, unless there is a heat of the moment and people are marching on the Hill at the same time while asking for the change, has to happen in baby steps. So getting one thing removed and then trying to get the next thing removed is a strategy. So I'm very much a champion of that. I understand that. The second thing is, it is possible that there were people in the room who this entire language affects, because as we've already discussed, a lot of times people with mental health issues or mental illnesses have also been affected by the penal system. With that being said, it could also be stated that at that time, the entire language of the article was not stated as well. That, okay, a synopsis was given of, okay, this is what we're trying to do because we found this language here and we need to take mental health out of this. And everybody was on board, because a lot of times one, the language barrier is there, as we've already discussed. Two, you already seeing this 7-page pamphlet giving us the positioning, the thought process behind this. This is what this will do, is everything about the thoughts about this thing, but the actual wording of the article. So the people in the room may have very well been affected by the entire wording, but may not have known that the entire wording was there.
That goes back to the language piece that Pastor Lorraine was talking about as well, like making sure we comprehend and understand everything that is in a policy when they give it to us to vote on, right? That is the people who are in the room. That's one of the things that you're going to talk about when you break up into your groups. Thank you, DA, for joining us. For the people, one of the things you're going to talk about is who gets in the room, who's at the table, who needs to be at the table that's not at the table, and let's get those people to the table. You know, and that includes even our community, our the people who aren't what my boss would call the usual suspects. You know, so yes, it's us. We do the work. We see each other all the time, but who is who's not at this table that gives us the community voice? You know, so as you're thinking about your groups, think about how do we recruit someone or some people from the actual community that can start using this voice, because once we find things that we need to go after, like, so say if this policy was still up, we would need a group, like Sherry said, to march and yell and fuss while we're still working on the policy, right? And that's where we all will support each other's efforts as well. But we will all do it knowing what everyone else is doing. So we're not overlapping. We're not creating extra meetings that don't need to be there. But we're all moving as a unit in the community and empowering the community itself, right? That's what I love about this. So what we're getting ready to do, we have the 4 groups. Any other comments before we do this? Okay. I hope this is helpful. Before I break you off into your groups, I really want to introduce you all to someone. The Lord has answered a prayer for me. And I have a Vista who is here to assist me with these Alive and Thrive efforts, and you all will be seeing her more often. Y'all will be you will probably get emails from her eventually. You'll probably hear from her eventually. But she's sitting here in my office with me. I'm gonna let her wave, and her name is Miss Connie Ross. So if y'all can see her, she's kind of blending into the background a little bit. But just be expecting messages from her soon. She's gonna help me stay organized, y'all. Say amen. She's gonna help me do what we need to do. So one other thing, because your groups is what's gonna end us out today. So I'm gonna let I know Diane, if you can talk real quick. I know it's not much information, but we have a group that's working on voter registration. And they are doing something Saturday.
Yes,
Yeah.
I don't have details about it yet. I was looking to see if I received back anything on email. I know that Melinda is planning to hold a voter registration event, possibly she's looking for Black businesses in Wyandotte County. So she's hoping to do one this weekend. I know she has another date, a couple more dates, one in August and one in September. So if you know of places that would host voter registration for us, that we would have a high turnout on a weekend, possibly. I mean, I think it doesn't have to be a weekend, but I think we'd get better turnout on a weekend. I also think we can look at churches.
We're going to start the conversation today with our groups, but this is not the end. Next week, we're going to finish the conversation with our groups, so that and then kind of report out to what we're coming up with. And DA, I'm sure you probably want to be in the policing policy group, if I'm correct. There's the education and the mental health and the juvenile justice. I'm sure you probably want to go into the policing one, right? So cool. So So I'm gonna put you all in those, and these are pretty much the questions. Let me get you the questions that you're gonna ask. So if you have your pen and paper, and I'll again put them in the chat.
So Chandra, you want people to put their answers into the chat for their group, right?
No, I want you to discuss this in your group. So make sure that someone is recording your thoughts and what you have to say. Because this is what's getting us started. We've talked, we went over some things. We may still need to do some education in some places, but at this point, we need to, we're going to start moving forward.
And you want people to send their notes back to you or to Kathleen or to me?
To myself. Send them to me or Diane. Send them to Diane.
That's fine. That's fine. We can do that. So that's fine. So are these questions, will they be on our small group when it comes up, or do we need to write these questions
I am
down?
getting ready to put them into your chat, so you can have them in there as well. Let me put them in there. So the questions are in your chat.
Okay.
And those are the things that I want you to focus on. This is getting ready to start building our or mobilize our efforts. So again, when we come back together, we're going to start talking about bringing more people into this, bringing the community back into this a little bit more. So we're moving from the talking to the action piece, right? If you know me, if you sat in a meeting with me, it's about action, all right? So when you all get done with this, I know Bernetta said that her church is having a voter registration this Saturday from 10 to noon, correct?
Good.
So Diane, when y'all plan that, maybe plan it after that so it doesn't coincide with that.
Most do not go into the home. However,
okay.
That's Brittany Talley's church?
No, that's Bernetta Martin's church, Quindaro Church of God in Christ.
Okay.
Okay.
They're having quite a few vendors up and down Quindaro all day Saturday, I think from like 2 to 6. And so I don't know if that's something you want to tap into as well as far as voter registration.
That's a 3-day thing, right, Mark?
Say it again.
That's a 3-day thing or a 2-day thing?
I don't know if it's a full 2-day thing. I just know that they're definitely going to be there Saturday, and so my thing is kind of tapping into it while it's there. I don't know if they're going to do stuff on Sunday as well or what.
I'm going to post that on the Alive and Thrive website as well. So I'm going to get more information on that and post that. So for those of you who don't know what DA Dupree is talking about, Black businesses are lining up on Quindaro, I believe like around 18th and Quindaro to like 10th and Quindaro, for a merchant, kind of like an open merchant thing where you can go and you can purchase and you can see what they all offer, learn about the different businesses of color in the community. So Diane, that might be good also to go to see where we could find some more places to do the registration at. So
maybe even can set up a table there at some point. I'll try to get up. So who can I contact to see if we can get a table there?
I know, I'll get with you on that. A young lady named Tamika is doing a lot of that. So I'll get with you on that. Okay.
I would just like to say I offered something to the meeting, though I came late, and yes, I'm going to have to leave early. I did offer something as I zoomed to other meetings.
Okay. Well, you're going to get put in a group real quick. So if you want to offer something to them real quick before you zoom out, that'd be great.
I will stick around as long as I can. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, everyone. I'm going to put you in your groups. When you're it'll give you probably about 20 to 30 minutes in your group. I think about 30 minutes. If you all finish, then feel free to go ahead and log off. But if you keep going, we'll hit these groups up again next week. Again, I thank you all. I'll probably come around to your groups for a little bit just to kind of see where you are. But I thank you all for this. I hope this is beneficial. And please share the word. Please spread it. This has got to be a movement in our community so that we can make the change that's possible and we can do it on one accord. Much can be accomplished if nobody cares who gets the credit. right? And we doing it together. So let's keep this going, all right? I'm about to put y'all in your rooms. Thank you again.
Thank you.